And I wanted to show you this painting that I did in Photoshop of this girl and put some kind of helmet on her and show you the process, how that's done, and my thinking about design. Unfortunately, the painting itself, I recorded it, but it didn't work. So I can't show you the process of painting the girl, but I thought it'd be interesting to add to her. So what I want to do is show you that process and going through, and the first thing I would do is find the silhouette. And the way I think about it is that designing something, the silhouette and the proportion are probably the two most important things that I think about. And so I'll go through and find the silhouette in flat gray, no color, no detail, just the overall big impression of the thing that I'm trying to find as far as a helmet. And then where we go after that is we need to make it look real. We need to make it 3D, so to speak, or go bump. And so the way I think about that is different value equals a different plane. So in other words, a value change equals a form change. Because part of the way that our eye sees depth, it takes its cues from value. So as values change, things look like they are advancing or receding. That's just the mechanics of it. And so if I want to take something flat and 2D and go to 3D, I would use this and kind of play that game, different value, different plane, and start to turn the object as if light is hitting it and revealing parts of it, and light is being blocked, and so parts of it are dark or appear to be dark and in shadow. So the third thing I would do is kind of do the secondary and tertiary forms or details. So these are things like, as we're going, the overall big impression of finding the silhouette in number one, the next thing I would do is actually come down here and go to smaller and smaller refining facets. So I'd go from the big shapes to the next biggest shapes and to the next and to the next until I'm doing the smallest details. So those secondary, tertiary details would be things like wires, nuts and bolts, nicks, scratches, rust. It could be wrinkles if that was appropriate, but for a helmet that wouldn't be appropriate. So it's just think of them as the really small details, and they don't change the overall design at all. The overall design is set here basically. And then the last thing I'm going to do is material indication, and by that how light reveals objects and how those objects look when light does reveal it, and the light bounces off and we receive that light in our eye. Materials and light act in different ways, So in other words, when you have a shiny metal object, you have a very tight white specular highlight, and the fall off from that is very quick until you get to the form shadow, and that's very tight and quick. So there's not a lot of fall off on that. In other words, the light doesn't spread out over the object, it bounces right off the object, so you get a tight highlight and a band where there's a half light, a very tight band where there's a core shadow, and so on. And if I want something to look like metal, I would use that approach. If it's plastic or something more matte in finish, then you have something called subsurface scatter, where the light uh, kind of, the photons come down and they hit. And instead of bouncing right off, they hit the surface and then they scatter every which way beneath the surface. And so the, the light spreads out and over the surface before. So some of it bounces off and some of it gets caught underneath the surface and scatters and bounces around there. And so that causes a difference in how it appears. And so I'm going to take that into consideration when I'm doing metal versus plastic, and so on. So let's go ahead and show you the process. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is just take out that white from the background and cover it up because I don't want to see white screaming at me. And while I do that, I thought I would just take some time and show you the reference that I was looking at while I'm creating this. I was thinking to put a helmet on her head, and so I had different inspirations that I found from Pinterest and Google, and one was kind of a fantasy kind of helmet that I thought had really cool texture and a nice design and looked very elvish kind of, and certainly old. And then there was the mech kind of robot head. I like the texture in that. I like the design and the hard surface stuff. There was an ancient kind of Chinese inspired bronze helmet that was neat, very simple, nice straights and curves. And then there was this, it's part of a motorcycle, part of the engine that I just cut off, and I like that shape of it. And there was also this kind of mech robot inspired kind of helmet. So those were my inspirations, and I kind of picked the more of the sci-fi way to go, and maybe with some wires connected to the back. Could be like internet, like an internet feed directly into her brain. So I thought that was might be kind of cool to jumpstart that. So so what I'm doing is I'm basically picked just a neutral gray, something I could see, and I started go ahead and kind of chunking in the big basic silhouette, and just something really that I could see that had definitely good shapes and a good balance of big shapes, middle shapes, small shapes. So part of my thinking in design was called layer caking. So what that is you have almost like a cake here, and you've got these tiers, and what that is you've got the big shapes, you've got your medium shapes, and you've got your small shapes, and then you've got your details here. So if I have a good balance of big, medium, small shapes, that, at least for aesthetic design, that works pretty well. And it also falls into kind of a rules of three, where you kind of balance the shapes big, medium, small, or dark, medium, and light, and that sort of thing. So I'm following that, and I'm looking for those kind of relationships in the silhouette with no detail whatsoever, just to see how this hat, this helmet is really supposed to fit on her head. And I'm not thinking anything about functionality. This is purely aesthetic design at this point, and just playing around. And so I'm using a basic default round brush in Photoshop, nothing fancy. I think I have the shape dynamics on, and some transfer, so I can paint opaquely or transparently depending on the pressure I put on the pen. And so it's really a hit and miss kind of hunt and peck endeavor, almost Clever Monkey style, where you try things and you undo it, you try again, you undo, until something looks kind of right and feels right. So it's basically very simple in that it's kind of a gut response. I'm not really thinking too much, I'm just reacting. And if my gut says it's a cool mark or a cool shape, it's a thumbs up, then I'll leave it. If it's not, it's a thumbs down, and it doesn't look good, I just take it out and put down another stroke. So it's a process of really correcting mistakes as I kind of find my way through the design. And you know, because you don't really know exactly where it's going, but you're playing around with the basic silhouette and value initially with no detail. Just to kind of give you a sense of the Photoshop UI, I'm over here is my tool presets, and I've got some go-to brushes, hard, round, soft, round, kind of default stuff. And then they go into more specialized brushes that look like natural media, and so on down the line. Some look like oil painting brushes, and that's really cool. And it helps me to access the brushes really quickly because I have a ton of brushes. And so if I don't want to pick through 100 brushes, I've got these brushes at my disposal pretty quick. And down here there's another palette there that's a little it's not open, but that's my my actions. And my actions are really handy because I can have this tool preset open of the brushes that I like to get to, but over here, I could have a totally different set of brushes, hundreds of brushes that I can look through if I need to. So I've got the quick access brushes over here, and over here I've got a ton of other brushes. So that helps with the workflow. This the actions is really handy too in terms of loading brushes. So when I open this up, I've got a lot of actions that load different brushes, like sci-fi brushes, cloud brushes, chain brushes, and it just loads them up over here real quick. And so I can, get to those brushes really quick instead of going into here, opening up or loading new brushes or appending brushes. So actions are really a good way to help your workflow. It helps my workflow. So now what I'm doing is I've settled on the design. The design is fixed at this point, and it's not going to change very much in terms of the silhouette and the proportion. And then what I start to do is try to make it look 3D, try to make it go bump. And the simple idea behind that is just different value equals different plane. So what I mean by that is if I go ahead and lay in a value here and a different value there, it's going to indicate a kind of a plane change going across the form from this way to this way. And so that's the way, simply, I begin to create the illusion of form. So here, there's a light value here, and then a darker value here. So you've got this kind of illusion that it wraps around the form. Because that value change is slow right in here, it says round. So it's kind of this cross contour wrapping around the form. So something that is, let's see, like this. It'll have like a soft transition going over the form, wrapping around the form. And the light is going away and into the dark shadow slowly. So that says basically to our eye, it's a soft form. And conversely, if I have something like this, and I have a very chiseled hard value change from this side to this side, then it's going to say it's going over the form very quickly. Boom. So it's chisel hard. So the quality of the core shadow, that simple idea of a soft shadow or a chisel hard shadow, a quick transition or a soft transition, will just give me instantly hard and soft kind of forms, geometric versus spherical. So I'm just kind of going through and doing that, and I've decided that this is going to be, a metallic kind of surface. So I'm trying to give it some material indication, and it's a matte kind of surface, so it's reflective but not highly reflective as glass or shiny metal. It's metal that's not been polished to a high degree, or it may be dirty through effects of weather, or depending on where she's been. I want to kind of make it look a little weather worn and give it a sense of character. So it's got to look as though the light's bouncing off of it, but also spreading out over the surface a little bit to give that matte look, that kind of brushed metal instead of highly polished metal. So now, after kind of the aesthetic design part, I'm moving into a little bit of the functional design, where I have to go through and not only do the different value, different plane, or different value equals a form change to the eye. I've got to make it make sense. I've got to kind of make an attempt at how the parts fit with each other and how they might work. So, for instance, in this area here, it's got a transition around her chin and then fit right around. How does that resolve? Um, how does this area under the chin go into the neck area here? And where are the plane breaks? So that reads, these wires back here, how do they connect? Where do they connect? And making those kind of statements so that it starts to come together visually and have some coherence there. And so I'm just kind of playing that game, different value, different. Plane, basically, another word for that is rendering. I kind of like that idea of something organic, like a human form, versus something geometric and man-made, something technical. So you've got this kind of beauty together with kind of a harmony between beauty and structure. And that's always fun because I like doing the portraits and getting a kind of look and lighting on the person's face, and then adding something technical to it is fun. Something a little bit robotic, a little bit cyborg like. And maybe it is that information's coming in through the internet and into her mind through all these different wires hooking up into there. And then she's got this kind of look on her face that's maybe she's not enjoying that too much. Maybe it's too much information. I don't know. This is kind of after the fact thinking about it. I didn't really think about it that much. Something about where you get ideas, inspiration, how to draw inspiration from something or somewhere. And of course, one of the great inspirations is looking at other artists. And I always enjoyed Frazetta. To me, he was a real good source of information for figurative work, for action, for a sense of story, composition, and his painting technique were all great. They all came together, and his images were exciting and compelling. I like a lot of different artists, and now, a lot of artists are digital, of course, and there's Craig Mullins and Sparth and guys like that are really inspirational, and their images catch me and they make me want to kind of decipher what it is they're doing. People and culture are also a great place to find inspiration. Going to the bookstore and finding a book on South America or Tibet or China, and just finding out what the people wear, what their jewelry is like, what colors are their clothes, what sort of hats do they wear. All those things are great sources of inspiration, and you can kind of springboard off of those things and riff off of those things and introduce them into your character designs or your vehicle designs or what have you. Emotions and expressions, those are inspirational things. Looking at people's caricatures, looking at how people handle different emotions, different expressions. They bring a sense of story, a sense of drama. They can bring that to your piece. And also the silhouette, just looking and keeping it simple. What are the basic shapes the big shapes into the medium shapes and the small shapes, and just how they play off of each other, one into another, and their proportions, thick into thin, and so on. And just playing with those things and then connecting them. How they connect is really crucial in if your eye or the audience is going to buy off on it. It doesn't have to actually function. It just has to look like the connections are valid. And that's kind of enough to sell the idea a lot of times. You can think about how it actually works a little bit later in the process. Stories are another great place to find inspiration. Movies, books, reading is great because your mind will just create that instantly, like a cinematic movie based on the narrative if you're reading a book, and that's personal to you, and that's really cool. That's what's great about reading. You'll notice there that I zoomed out and back in on the piece, and I'm looking to see if the whole thing holds up, if it's like a postage stamp size, if it holds up in terms of the tonal structure, and if it holds up in terms of the shapes, and if it holds up in terms of read. If it reads well as a postage stamp, it'll read well. It'll be fine if I blow it up to 10 feet or the side of a building. So that's kind of using it to back off. If I was painting with natural medium, I would get up from the easel and I would walk away from it and squint and just look at the basic tonal structure, the basic design, and see if it holds up. And that way, if it does, I'm in pretty good shape. So I really don't want to get lost in the details. I want to keep that overall design solid. But back to story and storytelling and narrative, if you can introduce some kind of a bit of narrative into your piece, a time of day, a genre, past, present, or future, maybe sci-fi or fantasy, and just something to give the audience something to ponder, something to keep them held there for a little while. That's always a good thing if you can get it. You don't have to have it, but it's something to think about. Other kind of books are nature books. If you like, I used to love those books where it was, over a certain city, and so it was photography. It was like flying over, and you're getting these great views of the Eiffel Tower, just cities, things you'd never seen from that vantage point before. Nature books, of forests, of animals, of insects, those are all fascinating. Here in the piece, I'm just trying to quiet down that background to the left of her face. It was a little too hot, and I wanted to quiet it down, so I just brought it down a couple steps in value to a more light gray instead of a white, and because I want the focus to be on her eyes and her face first. I think that's the first read. The web is a good source of inspiration as well. Obviously, you can go to Google, find tons of stuff. And recently, I found Pinterest, and that's really an awesome place. If you're looking for anything, almost, you can search for it and find it. And what's neat about that is it's more of a community, that whatever's on your Pinterest page, other people can find it, they can share it, and you can find their things and pin it to your Pinterest. And that's kind of neat, because it's like a trail that you keep following, and you find more and more stuff, and they're all connected, so you feel if someone pins your stuff, you get an email and so you know if someone's looking at your stuff. That's kind of neat. So it's a kind of a different take on finding reference, finding photos, finding artwork that you like. And so I'll frequently go there and look for inspiration. Um, Even your own life, things that happen, conversations that you have, feelings that come up, conflicts. Um, Use that because that's a great source because it's personal, it's yours. And that story, someone may have felt those things before, but if you just tell it simply and honestly from your point of view, no one else can do that. So it's instantly yours, and it's interesting and valuable in its own right in that way. I want to talk a little bit about the lighting scheme. We have kind of a key light basically just in front of her, just off the center to the right, to camera right. So there's that key light, and then there's a rim light, camera left, and that'll come into play. I haven't really put that in yet, but and then there's kind of a backlight or a top light that's reflecting off part of the helmet, part of whatever it is she's wearing. And so that's important. It's, I'm thinking of this is as like a full valued figure on a medium background, or let's say a medium light in value background. So it's full value on medium light background. And so I can, whatever the values, since our eye kind of sees value cues are the way our eye sees depth. So the more contrast that you have in your value range, it's going to show depth, but it's also where the eye happens to go and notice first. So it notices contrast first. The greatest number of contrast, your eye will go there first. So she separates out from the background, and I want that because she's the star of this painting here. So I'm flopping the piece back and forth because that really helps, because it's like getting a fresh pair of eyes. It's like having a friend come over and look over your shoulder, and it sees it in a way that you couldn't do. So if you don't have a friend, you just flop the canvas, and instantly you're seeing things new. You're seeing the shapes that you haven't seen before. And you've seen them, but it's different, and it helps me spot mistakes, things that don't look balanced. And I think just psychologically, if I'm painting, I want it to come out good. I'm invested in it, so I'm not going to look at mistakes. I'm going to tend to think everything I'm doing is great. And so I need that objective, sort of fresh pair of eyes thing, and flopping the canvas really helps see troubled areas and mistakes. And so I can address those things. That's very handy to do. Now I'm starting to put in that rim light, and it's hitting the front of her. And that rim light really is a good way to show depth, and it shows that very effectively in a piece. So you've got the rim light and off to the camera left. Inside her helmet area, I'm kind of go ahead and kind of breaking up that dark area with a lighter gray, just to break up that shape into smaller and smaller refining pieces, so that these are kind of like tertiary forms. And if I just keep going step by step and doing my primary forms, my secondary forms, and then the tertiary details, like the layer cake, those little candles on top, eventually I'm going to be doing the small details, and I'll um, do it in that kind of fashion that helps break the project down, um, and make it more manageable. Just thinking, a hose is basically a cylinder, so it's going to have, a core shadow, and it's going to be a soft core shadow because it's a soft form, and the light's going to travel into the shadow slowly, more slowly. So as opposed to some of those hard surfaced, um, cut metal pieces that have hard edges and may have angled core shadows. Um, in the design, the initial silhouette, I'm looking for interesting cuts, kind of in and out. So I'm kind of thinking about, these cuts. Let's see if I stop flopping this thing. I can draw on it, but this going down and cutting in and coming back and cutting around. This thing cutting in, around, back, and that sort of thing. Those cuts in and out. I'm looking for those kind of, straights against curves, interesting cuts, you know, thick to thin, back to thick again. That sort of proportion. Those things mean more to me than details and detailing the thing out, putting loads of detail everywhere. I think it's more about the simple shapes. So I'm looking, kind of trying to figure out the background. It's a little noisy and I want to quiet it down. I'm still, you kind of go through the valley of the suck, meaning you get into the middle of a painting and, frequently you have that feeling of, this looks like crap and I'm going to have to abandon ship at some point, because you're not sure how to get to the other side. And that happens a lot. And just be forewarned that you'll go through that, and you have to kind of make it a commitment just to say, well, I'm keeping on going. I'm going to get to the other side. But it's very tempting to just give up. And a lot of times you can't give up. You have to just keep going and then pull it out. So, but while I'm in the valley of the suck and I'm not sure and everything's out of control, that's when, I call them the enemies come out, those critical voice that says, you suck and you can't pull this out. It's just too hard. You're getting tired. You're going to have to start all over. And then, the kind of, the enemies, they get crafty, they get louder, and you get tired. Art is something physical, and you get a little bit tired and you have to pace yourself. So it's good to get up, walk away, and come back to it, and you'll see things, you'll spot problems, and you'll be able to see the solutions. And you may be able to just actually feel that everything's fine and you're doing well, and just keep going forward. So, yeah, there's definitely enemies that we face, and if we know what the enemies are, then we can kind of conquer those enemies. And they're varied, they're many and varied, and they're a little different for everyone, but they're also very similar. And I think one of the big ones for me, is that fear of failure, like it has to be perfect. And so that's enough to stop me sometimes, because that's a big mountain and I don't want to climb a big mountain. I just want to have fun. Well, how can you have fun if you've got a huge mountain in front of you? So I try to trick myself and just get in and throw down some shapes, and it doesn't have to be anything, just as long as I get something on the canvas, and then I'm in. I've started, kind of hurdled the biggest obstacle. and then I get maybe lost in it, or I start having fun, or both, and I've won that battle for the time being. Um, but yeah, that it has to be perfect, or the fear of failure definitely are two biggies, and I know of them. Even knowing about them doesn't always make it easy to start, but um, I think not paying attention to them helps me, just to say, yeah, it's gonna be crap, it's gonna be a total failure, so I'm just gonna do it anyway. So it's painting's very psychological. I think Glenn Vilppu said, uh, drawing is thinking first, and I think he was right, because you know he was of the mind that an artist was anyone that has an idea, something to express, and so it starts in the mind, and then it goes out into your through your hand. So I'm just kind of working those tertiary details and secondary forms, making sure things turn, making sure um, the lighting's consistent. I'm just putting in the time here. I'm not that, never have been that good at mechanical things, vehicles, and props, but I can use the principles of design and elements of design to fake it. And that's where it became really fun to me, because it's just working with shapes, and silhouettes, and proportion, and then values and edges, and playing around with those shapes, kind of like in a sophisticated way, but it's still just playing around with shapes that are dark, medium, and light value, and keeping it simple like that. I can discover, that process of discovery is still there, so it keeps it fresh. And once I throw down some shapes, my mind is immediately going to try to make sense of those things. That's what it does. And when my mind is engaged like that, of trying to make sense of something around me or in front of me, then I'm on a treasure hunt, because I don't know what it is, and my mind says, you must make meaning out of this, so I'm harnessing that kind of need for my mind to make sense out of these shapes, these abstract shapes, to my advantage. So just throwing down abstract shapes, and then finding something in it, and then using the different value, different plane idea, or a value change equals a form change, just to simply turn the thing, and kind of conceive of the form in space. And it's magic, and it's never ceases to amaze, being engaged in something like that. Being an artist, a visual artist, is really, there's some, or a lot of illusion to it, and it's kind of magical. Like, having been a 2D animator, when I'm sitting there drawing something, and the next page is a little bit different. The drawings are like wisps, and they're concerned with movement and motion, and that's magic. That is really a craft. The animation craft is really magical, and it requires, um, you know, heavy drawing skills, and really firm grasp of the basics, and then this kind of other thing involved with making it move, and you're doing it sequentially, page by page, as you flip those pages, but that paper between your fingers, and it moves. That's awesome. You've just created something, and in that way, um, you're very close to a creator, to kind of the gift of creation that I think God gives us, and we can participate that in creating art or creating a song. These things, we seem to conceive of things out of thin air, and it's really fun and beautiful thing to do. It's not easy, and it takes a lot of patience and skill, but anybody can do it. And we're just kind of doing it now on a more sophisticated level. It's not scribbling on the napkin anymore and saying, what do you see in that napkin, and make it, draw that. We used to play that game at home at the dinner table and scribble something on a napkin, and then my dad would make something out of it, and we'd be like, wow, how'd you do that? It was just mind-boggling. So that's the same idea that I'm thinking and I'm putting into play here. Fun stuff. So oftentimes you'll see I use the lasso tool, and it's really great for hard-edged forms. And I find that what I like about many of the concept artists out there that I see, I think Sparth was kind of being the first one. His images were so striking because he really had super hard geometric forms. They didn't, it was like, I wouldn't think to paint something like that. But somehow visually, those really hard edges work well, and they work well in concert with soft edges. And that play between the variety of hard and soft edges visually is like a like a 1-2 punch for the viewer, and it just captivates your eyes. And they need to look at that eye. It's like eye candy. It reaches out, and the eye loves that kind of stuff. So there's a place for very hard chiseled edges and very soft or lost edges. Now I'm putting in a bit of kind of webbing, something that the hat might be fitting, formed close, hugging your head, kind of like a neoprene, something that fits on first, and then you put on this helmet. It's kind of protecting your hair, protecting your head, and so on. So I kind of got a custom brush that looks repetitive, looks a little mechanical, machine made. Threw it down there just to give a hint of some material indication, some change in material. So the idea of counterbalance, let's look at that. I've got kind of a light thing here, a dark thing here, a light thing here, a dark thing here, a light thing, dark thing, light thing. So that counterbalance, that play, interplay, you can use it for value, light against dark, and so on. And you can use it between a metallic thing, a kind of rubber thing, metallic, rubber. You can use counterbalance with different materials. You can have a soft thing against a hard thing, or a textured thing like this here against a kind of brushed metal thing. That counterbalance going through is what I'm thinking of there, and trying to get that to work for me. So you've got light here, dark here, dark here, light. So you're playing that counterbalance game. You've got skin here, metal here, nylon here, or leather here, back to skin, to hair. All those kind of different materials you can use as kind of a counterbalance, and that's one of the principles of design that I'm becoming aware of and using more of. So here you can see all my paintbrushes here, and these are, let's say a couple hundred brushes in here, while over here I've got, 15 go-to brushes that I always use, and I can quickly get to them. But if I need a special brush um, in here, I can scroll through and take some time to do that. I can also get to the shape dynamics in here and the transfer, which helps me paint opaquely or transparently, depending on the pressure, the pen pressure. So oftentimes at painting, I'm squinting down um, like I would if I was an oil painter out in the landscape. I'd squint down at the thing I was looking at and try to simplify the complexity, simplify the shapes, definitely screen out the detail, because again, I'm looking for the design, that underlying structure, that shape language that's going to really carry my piece um, through the whole process, and I don't want it to break down. And so the easiest way for my design or my piece to break down is just to get mesmerized by the details and start painting those too quick or painting too many of them, and then that design, the overall impact of the piece will suffer because of that kind of minutia there. So I squint down and I force myself just to look at the big shapes and separate out the dark things from the light things, the family of the darks, separate from the family of lights, and don't confuse them. That also helps the structure of the piece and the overall readability of the piece. So I'm continuing to put that back part of the helmet into smaller refining facets, and making the connections of those tubular hoses or wires going into the back of her head, making the connections look valid and look good, and the material looking good, that it just has a sense of validity that makes your eye buy off on it, basically. Um, just continuing to flop back and forth. And so I'm going to go ahead and let this play out. And thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed and learned something. Bye-bye.